he kind of reminds me of Jalen Hurts, a guy that can just sling the ball, but running the football, he's really, really good at it. He's very adept, and this is going to fit very well. And I also like that he's well over 200 pounds in high school. So there's not a lot to not like about this kid. I think it's going to be a tremendous boon for BYU.
Hello and welcome to the Aptive Podcast Studio. This is the Loyal Cougars Podcast. I'm your host, Jake Edmonds. This is a podcast where we talk about what you, the fans, are talking about, and a lot of things to talk about today. And I wouldn't want to talk about it with anyone else other than the great Brandon Gurney, who's joining us today. Thanks for hopping on, Brandon.
Great. It's about time you guys had me on. Been watching your podcast, just waiting for that invite. So anyway, it's great to be with you finally.
Yeah, man. We just had to wait for you to get like another journalist reporter job, and we're counting down the days, and now you're at Daily Herald. So we got to get you on.
Yeah, it's great. It's great to be back in the business. And I love that you guys are doing this because I'm kind of unique with reporters in that I'm a Cougar Board creation. I'm proud of that.
Yeah.
Like I remember back in the day making that first post thinking, man, are people going to think I'm smart? Are people going to respond? And people just started liking what I said. And I was like, wow, I guess I'm an expert now. Started TBS with the Deseret News and got laid off. I've been doing radio with Ben Criddle. Ben's been great. And now Provo Daily Herald, where I get to work with Darnell Dixon, a guy that I really respect a lot. So, yeah, it's been an interesting journey.
Yeah, it's you and I kind of come from similar backgrounds in the sense that I also was on Cougar Board before I even got into journalism, before I even knew I wanted to be a reporter.
Yeah.
Probably like 2001 or 2 is when I joined. I would have been like 15, 16. And
Wow,
I was the same way. I was like, I don't know if I have an opinion that's like strong enough to post or to do anything, like to say anything. So I very much just lurked and read and kind of read what other people were seeing or were talking about. But I do remember that you were kind of this well-known figure and people knew you as Gman, right? That was like I actually remember when I first got into journalism, you were one of the first people that I kind of ran into at, I want to say it was a press conference or some sort of like practice session that BYU basketball was putting on. And I came over and talked to you and I said something like, do you still go by Gman? Like, do people still refer to you as Gman? And you said something like, I've tried to like stay away from that persona.
Yeah, I try to be professional
Yeah.
and all that. Maybe that's what I got with the Desert News. I was like, no, I can't be the G-Man anymore. I have to be Brandon Gurney.
Yeah.
Whatever, I'm the G-Man. I gotta own that. I'm proud of it. It's fantastic. But do you remember making that first post on Cougar Board just like, oh man, are people gonna like what I say? You get that one response that's like, yeah, you make a good point, and it just makes your day. And then you start going, and then pretty soon you get addicted to the dang thing, and
yeah,
and here we are.
Yeah, and then you start getting into like the friends only and the whole like underground of Cougar Board and kind of insider groups, and it's. I left for a while, and I think people are aware of kind of the little feud that Ben Criddle and I had. We've buried the hatchet.
That was weird. I didn't really understand that, to be honest with you.
Yeah, and I want to get him on. Like I was on his show, by the way. So similar to you, like we've kind of doing the same thing. I've been on his show once or twice. We're good now. Like it was so long ago. Like there's nothing there. But
yeah, Ben doesn't hold grudges. That's a good thing about Ben.
Sure, yeah. And that was great. And but I was gone. I was gone from Cougar Board for a few years, probably 3-4 years, which was nice. It gave me a break. And anyway, so I'm back, but I'm not really fully back. I'm just kind of back to read the popular stuff on the front page, and then I kind of leave. I don't really engage as much anymore. But I remember my first post was I'm pretty sure it was a joke about the Luke Staley got cut meme, which was big at the time. And I said like breaking news. And then in the body of the post, I said Staley got cut, and people hated me for it. They're like, I'm pretty sure it was reported within 5 minutes and it was deleted. And I was like, I wasn't suspended or whatever, but it was like a mod reached out and was like, you can't do that. So that was my introduction to Cougar Board.
That's hilarious. Wow. I probably never would have posted again. Props to you for coming back.
I mean, I might have,
Yeah.
I don't know how long I went without posting again, but I'm sure it was a while. Okay, Brandon, let's talk about the news of the week because it's it's insane that we're, last week of June, first week of July, and we're
Yeah.
still talking about like hard hitting breaking news. This doesn't happen in the off season for us as reporters, as you know.
Yeah.
So we'll start with the good news. So Ryder Lyons announces his commitment to BYU
Yeah.
over USC, over Oregon. I think USC had kind of fallen off the picture weeks prior. Oregon and BYU were still very much in the picture. But in your opinion, how close of a race actually was this between BYU and Oregon?
It was very close, and he was trending toward BYU. Like BYU was the front runner for like the last month. He took a late trip to Oregon, and that changed a lot of things. They came with a heavy bag, and Oregon basically gets who they want. They're the guy in college football, from what I understand with NIL. They're the team that's willing to pay a lot, and that complicated things significantly. And it was a real decision he had to make at the last minute. But he came back toward BYU, and I think the reason is kind of the old recruiting benefits that you can have, and the first one would be offering a guy first. That can be a big thing. I'm not saying it's always a big thing, but to me, a guy that's covered a lot of recruits, that matters. That matters in a lot of people's minds. This is the school that believed in me first. Yeah, all these schools they came on later, but yeah, these guys really trust me. They wanted me, and I think that really played in the mind of Ryder Lyons that BYU offered him in the eighth grade and was willing to take that chance. They didn't know what he'd develop into. Maybe he's going to crash out at the high school level. Pretty good bet he wasn't, but he arrived, and what I really liked about Ryder Lyons is you could kind of tell that the process wore him out. He was just done. He wasn't really into it. I'm wary of guys that are just too much into the process. You know what I'm saying? That
Hmm.
set up press conference, do all the fancy memes and whatever you call it on Twitter and all that. You could tell by the end of it, Ryder Lyons was like, no, I just want to get this decision done with and go play. And I like that about him. I like that. That to me, that's a promising aspect. And I'm very high on this kid. Watching him play, he's an absolute dual threat quarterback. I gave the comparison. He kind of reminds me of Jalen Hurts. He has that running ability. He's very, very good. If you want a BYU one, Jaron Hall's the easy
Hmm.
answer in that regard. A guy that can just sling the ball, but running the football, he's really, really good at it. He's very adept, and this is going to fit very well. And I also like that he's well over 200 pounds in high school, 6'3", 215. He's going to be durable. So there's not a lot to not like about this kid. I think it's going to be a tremendous boon for BYU, and I think the infrastructure BYU now has around where they're going to marry his inclusion into the program with a lot of other 4 and 5, maybe other 5 stars. I don't know. But definitely enough 4 stars where the infrastructure's I think's better where he's going to be able to succeed where other top quarterbacks did not.
Yeah, I love the Jalen Hurts comparison because he's a runner, but he's not necessarily a top end guy. Like you would think, Taysom Hill's a
Yeah.
really good top end guy. Taysom Hill's the ultimate quarterback runner, I think. But Ryder Lyons is a great runner in the sense that he can shed tacklers really well. Got kind of really good like leg strength. I think we saw his ability to squat. I don't know if he's one of the best squatters in high school or on his team or whatever, but he was out squatting a lot of guys. So very much a lower body strength guy, and not to say that he's slow, but he's not a top end speed guy. But he can break that first tackle and get a
Yeah.
couple extra yards. It feels like. So the question then, Brandon, is BYU's history with top recruits. I can go down the list. I actually did go down the list. 24/7 Sports has top recruits since 2020, and the top recruit is Ben Olsen. Second highest actually is Ryder Lyons now, which is fantastic. But you go down the list: Jake Heaps, Tanner Mangum, Jacob Conover, Jason Munns, Cade Cooper, James Lark. I would argue that Tanner Mangum is probably the biggest success story. Maybe James Lark with his game against New Mexico State, but is BYU cursed first of all, when recruiting top, 5-star, 4-star, 3-star quarterbacks, in developing these quarterbacks into a success story at BYU that eventually turns into a pro, or is this a common occurrence? Like, do you see this other places as well, and we're just kind of, because our magnifying glass is on BYU, we feel unlucky?
That's a really good question. I'd have to become more of an expert on other programs to see if it's this way. But yeah, again, I point back to the infrastructure where I just think that BYU didn't have the recruiting chops to really identify and develop these guys and understand what they were when they came in and surround them with enough talent where they could really flourish. And I think that's more the case with Ben Olsen than the Jake Heaps. Where Ben Olsen, he came on with the Cronin years and it just proved to be a disaster. So he moves on. And the mission thing, I think, got the better of him. And if you look at mission service with quarterbacks, it's still a thing. It's still a hump that we haven't gotten over where you're seeing guys serve a full 2 year mission and be able to really, really perform well on the football field. That list is still very, very short
Hmm.
as far as just developing into an NFL quarterback. I think John Beck might be the only guy that served a full 2 year mission that was able to move on to better things. But Doman didn't last long in the NFL, and I'd point that he was more of a runner and had other attributes in that regard that helped vault him into that, I don't know, place, or for lack of a better term. The Jake Heaps thing is just weird, and what I'm saying is you just have to look at all these by point basis. The interesting thing with Jake Heaps is I think there's a common perception that they brought him along too fast. I watched every practice where he was competing with Riley Nelson, and I hold to this day that they should have named him the outright starter as a freshman. I really do. He was doing very, very well in practices. I think they should have given him the reins and just go. And I think things may have turned out a bit different in that regard. But then you look at Jacobs; he was never able to really tap into the potential that he was granted, and maybe it just wasn't a thing. But I think the infrastructure is the biggest thing when you talk about Ryder Lyons and where he's going to succeed, where Jake Heaps and Ben Olsen did not. Where BYU, it's just the talent level. You have to surround these guys with people that are equal in talent that they can depend on and be in the program with and just have that culture and all that. So it's kind of hard to just put a rule with all these guys. It's an individual basis thing.
Yeah.
And I might be totally wrong with Ryder Lyons. Maybe he'll come back, crash and burn, and never pan out. You never know for certain. I don't believe that's going to be the case. I think he's going to be fantastic. But we'll see. It's going to be interesting. But BYU needs to be a place where 4 and 5 star guys succeed. That has to be a thing. If Ryder Lyons comes in as a 5 star quarterback and just burns out and doesn't do it, that can't be the case. These guys have got to play. They've got to rise to their ability because you're going to need 4 and 5 star guys. BYU's done very well with this recruiting class. Four-star recruits, which is extraordinary for BYU. Now these guys have to succeed. This needs to be a home for BYU. This needs to become a standard. This needs to become a start-off point. And I know there's tons of anecdotes. Oh, they don't always pan out and all that, but no, enough of them do. Where you need that to be a continuous pipeline within the program to where you're going to reach that next tier. And BYU's not quite there yet, but I think they start having enough recruiting classes like they have had last year and in 2026, and even increase that, then you're well on your way. And I think BYU's starting to realize that, and it's exciting. It's an exciting time to be a BYU football fan.
Yeah, and I think on the flip side of this, we're looking at BYU's top-rated recruits. So that tells you that maybe they're overrated or whatever. But you can also look at the players that BYU recruited that weren't the top-rated recruits that had success. So like your Jaron Halls and your Zach Wilsons and your Taysom Hills. Like those are
Yeah.
guys that weren't necessarily highly recruited. Not that they weren't recruited by a lot of schools, but they're not among the top on this list. And BYU was still able to quote unquote develop them into at least success stories at BYU, and in some cases NFL talent. And so I don't think it necessarily shines a poor light on BYU. I think it does actually kind of indicate that some of these kids are probably just poorly rated out of high school, or some of them just have,
Yeah,
in Ben Olsen's case, they deal with injuries throughout their whole career.
yeah.
And
Well,
so I think it's more indicative of that than it is indicative of like BYU's ability to develop these players.
yeah, the recruiting evaluation process is a lot more thorough and a lot better. And Brandon Huffman would be the first to admit it than it was back when Ben Olsen was recruited.
Mm.
I mean, the fact that they had Walt Williams as a 5 star was kind of ridiculous, to be honest with you. He was not that level of a talent. And yeah, so that definitely strengthens the argument for Ryder Lyons. I think that's a very good point you bring up, is that the evaluation process is that much better than it was back then.
Yeah. So, and then you look at even just the last decade. In fact, on Cougar Board, Crindor, who's a poster that actually compiled a list of 5-star quarterbacks between 2013 and 2022. So he gave a little bit of a buffer because there's obviously in the last 3 years there's still people that are TBD. But he listed out all these 5-star quarterbacks, and it's funny, he gave them baseball terms: home run, triple, double, single, and miss. We can just kind of rank them 1 through 4 or 5. But his top, in terms of how they ended up, his top quarterbacks were Tua Tagovailoa, Trevor Lawrence. Okay, then you go down the list: Bryce Young, and then it kind of falls off from there, right? So then you get Josh Rosen, Spencer Rattler, who's still kind of TBD, Bo Nix, JJ McCarthy, Kyle McCord, Drew Alar. Very much, kind of like these mediocre style players: Christian Hackenberg, Kyle Allen, Kyler Murray. I'd say Kyler Murray should be up higher in the list. Shea Patterson, Jacob Eason, Davis Mills, DJ Uiagalelei. Like a lot of these guys you probably recognize from when they were recruited, but not necessarily guys that panned out in college or in the pros. Caleb Williams is in there, but in Oklahoma, he didn't really pan out. He had to go to USC and have a successful career there. Caleb Klubnik, Max Brown, and then you get to guys that are like kind of no-name dudes, right? Blake Barnett, Hunter Johnson, guys that I don't really recognize. Quinn Ewers is in there, but he's still kind of TBD. This poster is more talking about his freshman year at Ohio State before transferring to Texas. Didn't really pan out at Ohio State. Sam Heward, Brock Vandegrift, Connor Wigman, and Ty Simpson. Probably more guys that you recognize, being kind of more of a recruiting expert, but guys that I don't really recognize that pan out in college. And these are 5-star quarterbacks, right? Being recruited
Yeah.
by, A&M, Ole Miss, Ohio State, Penn State, Oklahoma, Auburn, Alabama. So it's not just going back to kind of BYU's case, the list that we mentioned. It's not just BYU improperly recruiting, 4 or 5-star guys. It's a national thing. And, even the powerhouses that recruit 5-star players every single year, they miss a lot. And so does that mean Ryder Lyons is going to be a miss? Probably not, because as you said, the recruiting evaluations have improved a lot. And the BYU is not going to offer Ryder Lyons in 8th grade for no reason. Like, they've obviously evaluated his talent and they've had a microscope on him since then that I feel confident that he will pan out.
Yeah. System's a really big thing as well. Just looking at the Jake Heaps experience, he Brandon Dullman basically let him pick which system he wanted to run, and he for some reason he thought a pro style would be the best way to do it because you want to develop into an NFL, and it just wasn't the right system. It wasn't the right system for the program. It wasn't the right system for Jake Heaps, and I think that was a big thing as far as his decline. I think what did Brandon Doman in as an offensive coordinator is just there wasn't the solid system. People criticize Robert Anaya. Oh, he's not creative. But his system, you knew what he was running,
Yeah.
and the repetition and the knowledge of what's expected and how to do it is a big thing with offensive coordinating. Aaron Roderick now has that. He's established that within the program. That's a big reason why Jake Retzlaff, who I'm sure we're going to talk about a lot later, came to BYU in the first place. But Ryder Lyons understands that system. He knows what it is. He knows the fit, and he knows what's going to be expected of him and how to run that type of offense. And that's a big thing. You don't want to develop a system around the talents of the quarterback. I mean, you do a little bit. You want to tinker and all that, but the base system's got to be the system.
Yeah.
That's got to be the thing. You don't cater like they tried to do with Jake Heaps, and I think that ultimately that was one of the biggest factors why he did not succeed at BYU was just the system was too in flux. It wasn't sound, and you saw the result of it. It just wasn't a good thing, and BYU had to change offensive coordinators largely to that regard. So, and Ty Detmer kind of tried the same thing. That pro system just isn't at that time with BYU a thing that could be developed into a productive unit. So yeah, I mean, say what you want about A Rod. I know a lot of fans don't like him and all that, but he's developed a productive system. It works.
Yeah.
It's been productive since he's been offensive coordinator, and it's gotten better. It's not perfect. There's obviously room for criticism, but that's the system that's going to be run. The system that Ryder Lyons is a good fit in, and what attracted him to the program. And that's going to be there when he comes back from his mission.
Yeah, I'm very much team A Rod. I actually don't get a lot of the I don't understand a lot of the criticism that A Rod gets. I think a
Well, he's
lot
the
of the
offensive coordinator.
sure, but I think a lot of the mistakes of the offense have come at the execution level on the players, And we'll talk about Jake Retzlaff. Retzlaff was a part of that, and I'm team Retzlaff too. Like I think that he's made mistakes. I think he takes risks, which can be beneficial to BYU, but in some cases it's bad. Like it's very detrimental. And but I don't blame that on. I think A Rod, as far as a play caller, as far as a developer of talent, as far as a recruiter, I think has done a probably a B+ job, in my opinion. Back to Jake Heaps though. The only thing I'll say about Jake is that yes, he probably could have had a better offensive coordinator at BYU, but he also went to Kansas. He went to Miami. Like he didn't pan out anywhere. And I think Jake just has. I think Jake's problem was two things. He didn't have the confidence, and I think part of that was because he was sharing reps with Riley Nelson. And I think the other part of the confidence thing, and this is my second point, is he didn't have the locker room at BYU. Never had the locker room at BYU, and
Oh,
I think that disrupted his confidence. But it was very much like toxically divided between
yeah.
Jake and Riley. And
Oh, big.
you can take whichever side you want, but there were a lot of players that did not appreciate Jake regardless of his talent. They did not want Jake to be quarterback, and they were very much Team Riley.
The first time I got a sense of that, this is one of those stories that I want to tell that maybe I shouldn't, but I'm going to go ahead anyway. Is I remember Jake transferred in after graduate. He graduated early, so he was there, and I remember it was before spring practices, and it was pro day. And if you've ever been to pro day, basically the whole team shows up to support their guys,
Hmm.
performing for NFL scouts and all that. And I remember Jake was standing all by himself the entire time in his Elite 11 sweats, and all the players are just palling around and all that. And I remember Jake was just, I don't know, it was weird. And I kind of got a sense right then that it's not meshing. It's not gonna be. It's one of those things you look back at and think, oh, it's not a thing. But then you look back, no, that looked like it was a thing. So whenever I think of that, that was kind of the forebear of things of how it didn't work out for him. So that's something I'll always remember. Anyway,
Yeah, yeah. I
but
mean,
that just
that's
kind of emphasizes the point you just made.
and that was honestly that was just kind of the beginning of the end for Jake. Is that he just never really got along with
Yeah.
teammates, and but that kind of takes us to our next point, which is freshman starting quarterbacks at BYU have also not really panned out, and I think that's probably a pretty common occurrence throughout the country as well. It's really hard for a freshman to come in and to get up to speed in terms of college football compared to high school football. Let's just go through the list here. So Drew Miller, 97, John Beck, 2003, Jake Heaps, 2010, who we talked about, Taysom Hill, 2012, did play well, but was injured. Tanner Mangum, 2015, probably the biggest success story as far as freshmen go.
Yeah.
Zach Wilson would probably tell you otherwise. Joe Critchlow, 2017, Zach Wilson, 2018. So I would say two guys really panned out in their freshman year at BYU. The rest are questionable. And I'll say this. This goes for Ryder Lyons when he comes to BYU, whether he takes a 1 or a 2 year mission. He's probably going to start as a freshman, unless Bear Bachmeier does something or Hillstead does something phenomenal and wins the starting job in 2 years. That's probably going to be the case. But the same can be said about Bear. If Bear starts this year, like, can he break that curse? Is it a curse, Brandon? What do you think?
Oh, I don't buy the curse thing. I think that's just a kind of a throwaway without really giving enough analytics to what really goes on. And again, you have to evaluate each with a case by case basis. Transferring in and participating in spring practices is a really really big thing,
Yeah.
and that's what makes me hesitant on Bear Bachmeier. Yes, he had the Stanford spring practices. That's good. You want that, but to be in the system and to operate in the system, and BYU system's not. I mean, I don't know Stanford's system. I don't know the similarities if it's similar or whatever, but I have to think there's going to be enough new things with personnel and all that, and with just verbiage where he's going to be behind the curve. Fans love it though. I did a Twitter poll who's going to start. Oh, Bear Bachmeier. He's going to become the most popular player on the roster if he isn't already.
Yeah.
When they name, and I feel bad for McKay Hillstead or Trayson Bourget because if they're named the starter, they're going to have growing pains. It's not going to be pretty, and Bear Bachmeier is going to be just shouted from the rooftops by fans everywhere. We started Bear Bachmeier and all that. That's going to be a thing this year because I just can't see with his compressed time the ability to be named the starter. He is a very smart kid. I love his ability. I love how thick he is and that he can run, he can scoot, he's got a really good arm. I love his skill set. I think he's going to be a tremendous player for BYU. But absent that spring practice participation, I'm very, very hesitant to believe that he can come in and beat out two guys. And I don't think people are giving enough deference to McKay Hillstead and Trayson Bourget in this regard. Both those guys have college playing experience.
Yeah.
That's a big thing. Trayson, 2 years with Western Michigan, he played. He played quite a bit actually, and he did well. McKay Hillstead, 8 games playing experience for Utah State. That's a really good framework to jump off on and grab the reins as a BYU quarterback. Plus, being 1 full year within the system's big. That's a really really big thing. After a year, that's when players typically turn off. So what Bear is taxed with is extraordinary. He's going to have to show extraordinary ability to catch up to the framework that those guys have in understanding the offense to where you can operate it and just hit those routes the same way that McKay and Trayson can. And I really don't think fans are giving enough regard to Trayson Bourget. People don't believe that he's going to be the guy for whatever reason. Again, I did my Twitter poll. Stupid question. Gurney received more votes than Trayson Bourget as far as who do you think's going to start next year. I think he got 6% of the vote. Guys, he's good. He throws a good ball. He throws a gorgeous deep ball. I think he might even be the odds-on favorite over McKay Hillstead. I've been thinking it's going to be McKay Hillstead for a while now, but from talking to people that have observed practices, Trayson's he's releasing it quicker than McKay in a lot of regards, and he operates within the system kind of better with McKay, and I think that's going to be the difference you have. Where McKay's going to kind of be an ad libber. He's going to be a guy that kind of like Jake Retzlaff in some regard, where he might be able to play his best ball when things break down outside the pocket, a lot like he did with Skyridge. He was phenomenal with Skyridge and his ability to improvise and all that. But as far as operating within the system, from what I understand, Trayson Bourget is your guy right now. That's going to be big. That's going to be a big, big thing when it comes to the final evaluation. So the 6% of the fans that are believing in Trayson Bourget, yeah, keep with it, and it needs to be more than 6% because he very well might be your starting quarterback come the start of the season. And I know I'm jumping ahead with this. This is probably on the docket for the next thing. I'm sorry in that regard, but that's kind of the way I see it breaking down right now. So what Bears taxed with to overcome this and catch up? I mean, he's very intelligent. He's very talented, but I'm just not seeing it. I'm seeing maybe a mid-year emergence, but as far as just the first of the season, yeah, that's going to be our guy. That's really, really hard for me to believe that's going to be the case.
So here's how I would make the case, though, Brandon. You've got a guy with NFL potential. I think Bear has the best upside out of anybody on the roster. His ceiling's the
Yeah, I agree with
highest.
that.
You're right, though. He is a freshman, and we actually talked about this a couple weeks ago when we were kind of opining about who would if Jake were to leave, who would be the starting quarterback. And that's ultimately what we came down to, is that Bear has the best upside. Trayson has probably the highest floor, right? We kind of know what we're going to get with Trayson. Uh, and then McKay Hillstead is probably, we thought at the time, was probably your odds on favorite to start at least the first few games of the season, but that his size would limit him and that it would cause his ceiling to be lower. So that said, I do think because of who BYU plays their first 3 games of the season, they are almost automatic wins. And I think that's the time where you want your freshman quarterback to be starting. You don't want him to come in halfway through the year without any reps at all. Let's say McKay gets hurt, and let's say Trayson's not available to go, or Trayson's not, doesn't pan out. He's not that good. You're throwing Bear Bachmeier into Big 12 play without any reps, any meaningful reps in the season. And I think that could be detrimental. And then you bring in Ryder Lyons, whether it's the next year or 2 years down the road, you're going to have a quarterback battle between 2 NFL potential guys, and you're probably still going to end up with that anyway next year or 2 years from now. But I would want to have a freshman quarterback with that experience going into next year or the year after, rather than someone who's just been sitting with that NFL potential. That's my opinion.
That's a good argument, but I don't think you can think that way if you're Aaron Roderick. It's got to be a now thing. It's got to be who gives me the best chance to win now. I do believe that if Bear's close to Trayson and McKay, yeah, you go with Bear in that regard. My argument is I just don't believe that the framework's going to be there where he can make a case where he's that close where you can start him in that regard. Maybe I'm wrong. We'll see how it pans out. But to me, a guy that came to BYU, I think in June. I think he's been here a month. Tough. That's really tough. My
Yeah.
advice to him would be I remember watching practices with Max Hall back in the day, and they try all sorts of things, and nothing would work. And well, I shouldn't say nothing, but the defense would get over and all that. And it seemed like at the end of practices, Max was like, "All right, I'm just going to throw Dennis Pitta's option routes." And they just thrashed the defense up and down the field. You couldn't cover it and all that. Reason I bring that up is you have that guy in Chase Roberts.
Hmm.
And I've heard the GOAT of BYU receivers argue this point, and I absolutely ascribe to this. This needs to be a Chase Roberts based offensive system. I think he's that good. I think he deserves Puka privilege. He deserves Austin College privilege. I think he's that guy
Hmm.
where he needs to be afforded 10 targets a game at least. And with that framework, with that guy in this system, that's a big thing for these quarterbacks. You look at how Riley Nelson survived at BYU, how he became the guy. And Riley was the first one to admit this. I knew I had number 2 down the field anytime I wanted him. Even if he's not open, I'm lofting that thing up. Chase Roberts is 6'4". He can get that ball. He's open basically every time. What was amazing to me in the press box, and I love watching him in the press box because you really get the sense of who's open. Chase Roberts is open almost every single time. Every time.
Hmm.
So I'm absolutely for that. Find number 2 often. Go to him every single time because that's how you're going to succeed. And check down. Check down's your friend. That's the number one thing that bothered me about Jake Retzlaff is he just would not check down ever. LJ Martin's a weapon in that flat. I'm telling you, that guy can catch the football and do a lot of really good things. Pokai Haunga, a guy that fans aren't really familiar with right now, played receiver in high school. He's now at running back. He's going to be a terror in the flat. I'm telling you, he's really good. So anyway, that's my unsolicited advice to Bear, Trayson, and McKay. Look for number 2 often and check down.
Yeah.
That's how you're going to win that job.
Love it.
Do that. Do those 2 things. Sprinkle in a little Carson Ryan, Parker Kingston, and all that. But no, this needs to be a Chase Roberts based offense. If you don't believe me, believe the GOAT, Austin Collie, because he's been arguing it for the last year. And I'm absolutely into that. But my larger point is the framework's there for these guys to succeed better than otherwise.
Hmm.
They should have a productive running game. The offensive line will be better than last year by all accounts. And having Chase Roberts back in the system is enormous. He's there. Do not underestimate how good this guy is.
Yeah.
He is very good.
And then
Very
you
good.
then
And
you bring
and
in
depending on him to bail out an otherwise inexperienced quarterback. And man, if I'm that guy, I'm calling Chase every single day. Let's throw. Let's go. You've got to get that time in. That's very important to have that connection, that symmetry. That's what Max Hall established with Austin Collie and Dennis Pitta. They were throwing together every single day in the offseason. I hope that's happening. I hope Chase is the forebearer of that, and I believe he is. Chase is the ultimate team guy, where he's given those guys that rep. Listen, I'm going to do this and that, and just having that knowledge, that thing where yeah, he's going to be there, and we have that connection, and we know that that's how he's going to settle in right there, and this is what he can do. That's got to happen. I believe it is happening. But yeah, anyway, that's my formulation of success. There you go, guys. That's how you're going to succeed in this BYU offense.
This episode is brought to you by Aptive. Aptive believes that every home should be enjoyed. They tailor their pest control treatment plans to target pests when and where they're most active. Plus, if you see pest activity between treatments, Aptive will return to take care of the problem at no additional cost. It's their way of making sure every customer is satisfied and every pest is controlled. If pests stay away, Aptive is why. Visit AptivePestControl.com/loyalcougars or call 844-966-4787. Mention this promotion to get your initial treatment for just $29. That's AptivePestControl.com/loyalcougars or call 844-966-4787. Terms and conditions apply. Get home field advantage with Aptive. Looking to get your brand in front of BYU's most engaged fans? The Loyal Cougars podcast and Cougar Board are your perfect match. Cougar Board is the largest online community of BYU fans with thousands of posts every day. The Loyal Cougars podcast is the official podcast of Cougar Board, and we have sponsorship opportunities available for both the podcast and the site. Contact us at sponsorships@loyalcougars.com, and we'll help your message hit home with the Cougar faithful. Again, that's sponsorships@loyalcougars.com. Let's get to the reason why we're even talking about this, because for half of the offseason, the QB situation was set. We hardly even talked about it. The Jake Retzlaff saga is now seemingly coming to an end. So the news of this week or last week was that Jake's attorney, finally released a reply to the allegations or to the lawsuit that he had sexually assaulted a woman in Salt Lake City. And I wanted to, we don't have to read necessarily bits of it, but I wanted to get through kind of the bullet points of this, which was Jake admits that they had a sexual encounter, that it was consensual. They released text messages that Jake and the plaintiff had exchanged after the incident allegedly took place, right? So they're flirting, they're talking, they're having like normal conversations after the event. And then Jake's attorney, this is kind of the bombshell of the whole thing, and I think this is where it gets a little bit messy, is that Jake's attorney alleges that the assailant may actually be a Utah football player and that the plaintiff is going after Jake instead because he has potential money, in the sense that he's an NFL prospect. He's at least probably going to be picked up as a free agent, where the other allegedly Utah football players that she also slept with do not. And they're either bench warmers or they're starters that don't have any NFL potential. So that's a very aggressive accusation. But the point of this whole thing was that, look, Jake did not sexually assault this person. It was very much consensual. The words they used were that it was they said it was an uneventful but pleasant evening, which I think is the best way to explain anything. I'm going to probably start doing that more often. That was very uneventful but pleasant. But that was kind of the gist of this kind of reply to the lawsuit. Is there anything you take away from that, Brandon? Is there anything that surprises you, or is that kind of what we expected all along?
It's kind of what I expected. The going after the Utah player is wasn't expected. That was not anticipated in any regard. But I'm surprised at the length of the suspension. I've been thinking it's going to be 3 or 4 games for a while now. That's what I ultimately believed would happen. But the case itself, when it broke, it was really, really confusing. A lot of the verbiage,
Mm-hmm.
just the realistic nature, the timing. It was extraordinary that it was brought right after the transfer portal closed, 15 months later after the alleged incident. That's interesting.
Yeah,
Very
the
interesting.
timeline was
And
off. Yeah,
yeah, and the fact that she got this rape kit done, went to the police 5 days after the encounter with Jake Retzlaff and didn't name the guy, but did assert that it was someone she knew since childhood.
Hmm.
And then all of a sudden changed it back. Oh, yeah, it was Jake Retzlaff. 15 months later, man, I, it just speaks to how flimsy this case was from the get go. And it makes you wonder, was this really what they wanted to accomplish through filing this case? It brings up a lot of questions. I don't want to make any accusations anyway, but it's just extraordinary and really unfortunate that it ended up like this. But no matter what perspective, Jake's got to be better. He's got to understand
Yeah.
what he is, and also I'll bring this up: the fact that there's over 100 guys on the roster, and it happened to be your starting quarterback.
Yeah. At the
That was
and it wasn't 13 months or 18 months ago. It was your starting quarterback right after he had beaten Colorado and finished an 11-2 season.
yeah, it's a little too coincidental in my mind, a little bit too coincidental.
Sure.
So I buy the arguments. Of course, I don't know what happened. You want to give due deference to any plaintiff, especially when it involves sexual assault. But it doesn't look like this is a strong case. And I have to wonder if the lawyer, when he filed it, knew that it wasn't going to be a strong case, and what was ultimately the why it was filed in the first place. It's really interesting to see what's going down. We'll see what happens, but yeah, Jake's out of the program, and it's really unfortunate. And I don't think fans understand. I think Jake's a lot better than I think a lot of fans assess. And I think he was going to set for a big year, and I think it hurts BYU tremendously with him not going to be part of the program and not going to be that quarterback leading the team. I think it's a big, big thing for the program. So we'll see.
Yeah, and I'm honestly I'm ready to move on from the case. Like I think I agree with you. I think that it's a pretty flimsy case. It feels very much like the lawsuit was filed with the intent to settle. I don't think they
Yeah.
ever intended for this to go to court. And Jay Drew with the Desert News, who we've had on the show, he actually says sources say the civil lawsuit filed against Retzlaff could be resolved as early as Tuesday this week. So we're recording this on Monday. It could be resolved this week, which I think that would be great for all parties. And then in that case, and this is kind of the next part of the Jake Retzlaff saga is that Jay says Jake already has a destination school mostly lined up and could announce as soon as Wednesday. Suffice it to say, it's a big time school. So we'll get to that, but I do think the case is pretty much. I think we can get beyond the case, right? I think that's you and I agree. Like it's pretty flimsy. It's not gonna hold up. It's probably gonna be settled this week. That said, what we do know, and this is outside of the case, and Jake admitted to it, is that he had a relationship with a woman. It was, according to Jake, consensual, but it still happened. And so, you know, based on what we've seen in the past, Brandon, obviously, Brandon Davies, we've seen Harvey Unga, we've seen Jamal Williams. I'm sure it's happened in other cases that weren't as public. Do you think 7 games is an appropriate amount of time? We've seen longer. I think we've probably seen shorter. But what's your take on a 7 game suspension?
I've had a lot of thoughts on this. I think it's extreme, but I understand BYU's perspective in that you have to send the message that this isn't allowed at BYU. That you can't do this. This isn't a thing where you're just going to be slapped on the hand. This is who we are. And I think what BYU's struggling with is they've really extended that net. They're bringing in a lot of players that are outside your typical BYU recruiting pool, especially with the basketball and all that. And I think the worry with the board of trustees is with all that influx, you're going to kind of go away with what BYU is and the standard and the guys that are going to represent. So I think it's a message to all the guys that are coming in, which they love extending that net. That's a big thing for BYU. BYU wants that. But they also want these guys to understand you're not different. This is the rules. This is what BYU is, and this is what you have to do to be here. And it's not a joke. It's not something where, oh, yeah, you're going to be slapped on the wrist if you do this. No, if you engage in this activity, we're serious about this. This is the standard of the program. This is why you're here. This is why we have an athletics program, is to promote the values of BYU. So we have to operate within that framework. It's unfortunate that Retzlaff has to take it on the chin because of that. But I totally understand BYU's argument in that regard and why it did what it did. And we don't know the details. We don't know exactly what Jake admitted to.
Yeah.
If there was more than one girl, if it whatnot, I don't know. I don't like speculating on that. But yeah, I with what BYU is and the message it wants to set and the program it wants to be, you kind of understand why it had to be 7 games in that regard.
Yeah.
3 games, it's like, okay, yeah, he was bad, but he's coming back. Not going to play against three. To me, it had to be 4 games. It had to be at least one significant game. So I think it had to be that Colorado game if it was anything. And I kind of tend to believe 4 or 5 would have been appropriate, but I can't argue strenuously against 7 games because you have to give deference to BYU and what it wants to be, and you have to respect that authority. So anyway, it is what it is.
Yeah, I think 3 would have been probably appropriate, knowing what we know. But I do think that there's probably a lot we don't know. For example, it sounds like, based on kind of behind the scenes rumors, that Jake wasn't fully honest about what had happened,
Yeah,
and I don't know if that means what had happened with this AG person or what had happened, before or after. Maybe there were other incidents. And again, we've seen longer, but I think the longer cases were involving pregnancies. And so obviously there's, it's different set of circumstances there. I also think that this was longer because it was so public, right? I think if,
yeah,
if this was handled internally and if it never was released publicly, I think BYU probably, Kalani probably could have gotten the honor code office to
absolutely.
lower it, but because it was so public for so long, and because it involved, I know it wasn't a criminal charge, but it involved a criminal activity. Um, it just put such a stain on BYU, and I hate to say, I hate to think that they're using Jake as quote unquote an example, but I think you're exactly right. Like they had to send a message to players on the team and to recruits coming in that, like, hey, we're serious about the honor code. Like you can, and we've talked about this in the past, like the honor code can work to your benefit, right? I think, if you want to make it to the pros, you have to abide by a structured set of laws, whether it's, NCAA bylaws, whether it's NFL or NBA rules. There's rules, there's laws that you have to abide by. And BYU, they're probably stricter than normal, but that gets you ready for a professional setting where you're actually getting paid to play. And it's not just a suspension and you have to transfer to another school. It's an actual like loss in paycheck if you break rules. And so I think this is sending a message to players that want to take college football at BYU seriously. And it sucks that it happened to a guy like Jake. I think Jake was I thought he was a great guy. I still think he's a great guy. Very articulate. I think he's very, very thoughtful, very kind. He just got caught in a situation. He's young and made a mistake.
Yeah,
So knowing
yeah,
that,
I agree with you.
and Jay Drew kind of alluded to this, the rumor is now that Jake Retzlaff is going to transfer, and Notre Dame seems to be the common theme among people on social media. They have a definite need and an immediate need at quarterback, so that would make total sense. I've also heard Miami was high on Jake's list. Miami would make no sense because they have Carson Beck. Uh, it's to me, Brandon, it's hilarious and maybe hilarious is the wrong word, but pretty ironic that Jake Retzlaff would be going from one incredibly non-Jewish school to another incredibly non-Jewish school, probably two of the most non-Jewish schools in the country.
Seriously.
Other than that, do you see Jake at Notre Dame, and would he be a good fit? Is he a guy that can contribute to that team right away?
The fact that Jay Drew used the verbiage he did when describing the program kind of nails it right there that it's Notre Dame, and that's what I've been hearing as well.
Mhm.
Um, Man, I hope he kills it. I hope he gets that starting job, and I hope he does very well. I'm a fan of Jake Retzlaff. I think he's genuinely a good person that screwed up. That it happens. And that's the unfortunate thing. You'd like to see it rectified at BYU and allow for that means where he can stay and flourish within the program. That's the biggest regret I have, is because I think that's what BYU ultimately has to be, is a program that, yeah, guys are going to screw up, but we have the framework here at BYU where you can rectify that and still find success. To me, that's kind of the bigger tragedy with Jake Retzlaff. But I'd love to see him to go to Notre Dame and absolutely kill it there. I'm a fan of Jake Retzlaff. I hope he does very well no matter where he goes and overcomes this. And I also respect him for sticking to his guns. He could have settled out of court. This never could have come to light. But I think there's a lot to admire by him saying, "No, this did not happen. I'm not admitting to this. I knew this was coming, but no, this absolutely did not happen. I'm going to admit to everything and the consequences. I'll take what comes and deal with it." And good for him for doing that. At the end of the day, that I think this is going to be a positive thing, and I think he's going to be that much better of a person for taking it head on and succeeding in that regard, hopefully.
All right, Brandon, thank you so much for hopping on. If you want to support Brandon, head over to the Daily Herald, read Brandon's stories, engage with him on social media. You probably already are, honestly, if you're listening to this show. I think we have a lower following than you do, so you're helping us out more than we're helping you out, but we appreciate you hopping on.
Well, my pleasure. Like I said, I come from Cougar Board. Unlike most media types, I admit I read Cougar Board every day. I come from Cougar Board. I'm proud of that. It's awesome. It's a great form that FA brought.
It's wild.
So anyway,
I actually think a lot of media guys do, even though they're not going to admit it. I know for a fact, at least, before I went to BYU, I think I sat behind Jay Drew at a basketball game and he was on Cougar Board. I don't think he has an account, but he was like lurking. I'm fairly certain the BYU Sports Nation guys do, or some of them do, or whatever. But I don't like it's, to me, it's as beneficial to read Cougar Board and to get a pulse of what BYU fans are saying as Twitter is,
yeah,
if not more.
I absolutely agree with you. There's a lot of garbage on there. There is,
Absolutely, yes, absolutely.
but you got to learn to wade through it, and there's some gems. You learn some things. You learn some perspectives.
Yep.
And yeah, I read Cougar Board every day. I admit it. I'll probably go to Cougar Board right when we log off. So there you go.
Well, you'll see yourself on there probably in the next few hours. So keep an eye out for that. All right, thanks, Brandon, for hopping on. This is the Loyal Cougars podcast. If you like what you heard, head over to YouTube, head over to Spotify, or Apple Podcasts. Leave a review, like the video as we keep this thing growing. Until then, we'll see you next week.